The silence first answered me on a winter morning when the city was still holding its breath. The call to prayer had faded, the buses had not yet begun their coughing starts, and even the stray dogs that argued through the night were quiet. I was standing at my kitchen window, holding a chipped cup of tea, watching fog press its forehead against the glass. I whispered, without knowing why, I don't know what to do anymore. I didn't expect anything back. Silence has always been a wall, something you speak into and hear only yourself return. But that morning, the quiet did not feel empty. It felt patient. My name is Ayan, and until that winter I believed kindness was loud. It announced itself in grand gestures, in speeches, in people who knew the right words at the right time. I was not one of those people. I worked at a small printing shop near the old market, setting type, fixing jammed machines, nodding politely to customers whose lives moved faster than mine. My father had died 2 years earlier, my mother lived with my sister in another city, and my days followed a narrow path from home to work and back again. I spoke little because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Silence, at least, could not betray me. That morning, after the fog lifted, I found a small bird on the stairwell of my building. Its wing was bent at an angle that made my stomach tighten. It didn't struggle when I knelt, it only watched me with one bright, unblinking eye. I looked around, hoping someone else would come along, someone who knew what to do. No one did. The building was quiet, as if it were listening. "I can't help you," I murmured. The bird did not move. The silence seemed to lean closer, not accusing, not demanding, just waiting. I took off my scarf, wrapped the bird gently, and carried it back into my apartment. I spent the next hour calling numbers I found online, animal clinics that were either closed or too far away. Finally, I made a small box, lined it with cloth, and placed the bird inside. It was not a heroic act. It was clumsy and uncertain. But when I sat back on the floor, breathing hard, the quiet around me felt warmer, as if it had answered, "This is enough for now." The bird survived. A neighbor eventually took it to a veterinarian, and a week later it flew away from my balcony, pausing only once to look back. I stood there long after it was gone, feeling something unfamiliar loosen in my chest. The silence did not congratulate me. It simply stayed, steady and present. After that, I began to notice how often silence spoke, if I let it. At the printing shop, there was an old man named Rashid who came every Thursday to print flyers for a charity no one had heard of. He always paid in exact change, counting each coin slowly, his hands trembling. The younger workers grew impatient, tapping their feet, clearing their throats loudly. I used to rush him, embarrassed by the attention. One Thursday, I did not. I waited, hands folded, eyes lowered. We stood there together, surrounded by the hum of machines and the soft rain against the windows. When he finished counting, he looked up, surprised, and smiled. It was a small smile, but it stayed with me all day. The silence between us had said, "You are not a burden." Kindness, I learned, did not always need words. Sometimes words got in the way. One evening, on my walk home, I saw a woman sitting on the curb outside the closed bakery. She was holding a child wrapped in a thin blanket. The child's face was flushed, his breathing shallow. People passed by, eyes forward, steps quick. I slowed, then stopped. I did not know what to say. My tongue felt heavy, useless. The woman looked up at me, her eyes sharp with fear and exhaustion. "He has fever," she said, as if daring me to turn away. I nodded. I had no medicine, no money to spare beyond what I needed for the week. I stood there, silent, feeling the weight of my inadequacy. The quiet pressed around us, thick as the night air. In that quiet, something answered me, not with instructions but with courage. I offered my jacket. It was old, the zipper broken, but it was warm. The woman hesitated, then accepted it, pulling it around the child. We sat there together for a few minutes, saying nothing, listening to the city breathe. When I left, she touched my arm and said softly, "Thank you for not looking away." At home that night, I lay awake, replaying the scene, wondering if I should have done more. The silence in my room did not scold me. It did not soothe me either. It simply reminded me that presence mattered, even when solutions were out of reach. As winter deepened, my life did not change dramatically. There were no sudden promotions, no sweeping transformations. But small moments began to gather, like drops of water forming a stream. I started arriving early at the shop to make tea for everyone. I listened more carefully to customers, even the difficult ones, letting pauses stretch instead of filling them with nervous chatter. I called my mother more often, letting her speak without interrupting, even when the line crackled and words fell away. In those gaps, I felt closer to her than I had in years. One afternoon, a young boy came into the shop alone. He wanted to print a school project, but he had miswritten the instructions and needed help. He spoke quickly, apologizing for everything before it went wrong. I recognized the fear in his voice, it echoed my own. Instead of correcting him immediately, I sat beside him and let him explain. We worked through the mistakes together, quietly. When he left, he bowed his head slightly, as if we had shared a secret. The silence had answered again, saying, "You are capable of gentleness." The most profound answer came on the anniversary of my father's death. I had avoided the date all year, burying myself in work, in routine. That morning, the weight of it pressed down on me until my breath felt shallow. I took the day off and walked to the river where my father used to bring me as a child. The water moved steadily, indifferent to my grief. I sat on a rock and let the memories come, sharp and uninvited. I wanted words, explanations, a reason for his absence. None came. For a long time, there was only the sound of water and wind. Then, slowly, the silence answered, not with meaning but with space. Space to cry without shame. Space to remember my father's quiet acts of kindness, the way he fixed neighbors' radios without charge, the way he listened more than he spoke, the way he sat with me when I was afraid, saying nothing until I calmed. I realized then that he had taught me this language long ago. I had just forgotten how to hear it. Spring arrived softly. The city grew louder, but I did not fear the noise anymore. I carried the quiet within me, a steady companion. One day, I found myself on the other side of kindness, in need of it. I slipped on wet stairs outside the shop and twisted my ankle badly. Pain flared, sharp and humiliating. People gathered, offering advice, opinions, stories of worse injuries. Amid the noise, a woman I barely knew knelt beside me and simply held my hand. She said nothing. She waited with me until the pain settled enough to stand. In that moment, I understood fully. Silence, shared, could be a gift. Months later, I moved to a slightly larger apartment closer to the river. On my first night there, surrounded by unpacked boxes, I felt the familiar urge to speak into the quiet, to test it. Am I doing this right? I asked the empty room. The silence did not rush to reassure me. It did not promise certainty. It answered the way it always had, by staying, by making room for the question itself. I began volunteering on weekends at a small community center, helping children with reading. Many of them came from homes where words were sharp or scarce. At first, they filled the room with noise, testing boundaries, demanding attention. Over time, they learned to sit with a story, to let pauses stretch between sentences. One girl, who rarely spoke, started staying after the others left. We would sit together, reading quietly, the pages turning like soft wings. One day, she looked up and said, "I like it when it's quiet here. It feels safe." I felt the answer ripple through me. Kindness did not make my life perfect. There were still days of doubt, of loneliness, of mistakes I wished I could take back. But the silence no longer felt like an absence. It was a presence that invited me to act gently, to listen deeply, to accept that not every problem needed solving to be honored. On a warm evening near the end of summer, I returned to my kitchen window, a cup of tea in my hands. The city hummed below, alive and imperfect. I did not whisper a question this time. I simply stood there, breathing, letting the quiet settle around me. It answered, as it always did, not with words, but with the steady assurance that kindness, even the smallest kind, was enough to keep going.